Hey guys, so here we are in what I call the shadow of MTuner 1. And what I mean about that is, I said at the beginning of the course we're going to do all these things to you and they're going to seem kind of ambiguous at first, but once you actually experience them, you'll have a much clearer sense of what they are and how they work. And so now you've just gone through MTuner 1, and I hope you do have that clearer sense of what it's about, how it works. So what often happens in the shadow of MTuner 1 and has been happening this term is this is when some students start to say, ooh, this is more challenging than I thought. How can I do well in this course? I really want to do well in this course. So the purpose of this video is to try to answer that question. I want to start by saying, first of all, there's no silver bullets. It's not going to be easy. In fact, what I'm going to suggest to you will actually be a semi-effortful approach. That's just the way it is. In introductory psychology or in introductory courses in general, you just get exposed to so much information, so many theories, so many definitions, so many important people, in this case, so many experiments, etc., so many parts of the brain. There's a lot of stuff. And ultimately on the MTuners and especially on the final exam, we are testing the extent to which you can retain that stuff. And that's a challenge. There's a lot to learn. So I think what I want to do is sort of guide you as to how to do it. And my focus is really going to be on the MTuner and the final exam in particular. And they make up 70% of the course. So Peer Scholar, things like that are separate. I'll talk to you about those separately. But this video is like, how do you learn that material well to do well on MTuners and to do well on the final exam? So just before I get to that, I want to say one other thing. I've said this before, but maybe you'll feel it better now. The MTuners are not worth much, 5% each, but they are to prepare you for a final exam that is more challenging. You don't get multiple attempts at the final exam. It's a traditional, you get multiple choice, just like the MTuners, but you pick one and that's the only chance you get on the final exam. The final exam is challenging, it's worth 50% of the grade, and it's must pass. That is the thing you should be worrying about doing well on. I know that some of you are cheating on the MTuners. First of all, I just want to say boo, not cool. Those of your classmates who are doing them right don't like you. I don't like you. Well, I don't even know you, but I don't think, first of all, you're kind of going against what we're trying to do to help you. And that's really the important point, because the idea of the MTuners, if you do them right, if you treat them like a final exam, the idea is that it will prepare you for the final exam. If you cheat, you may get 1 mark more on a given MTuner, maybe, or half a mark more on a given MTuner, and I guarantee you that will cost you 5 or 6 marks on the final exam. So you're not doing yourself a favor by cheating. And those of you who are doing it right know that those people who are cheating, they're not doing themselves a favor. You will prevail in the end. You will do better on the final exam. The MTuners are created to give you retrieval practice, and that helps on the final exam big time. So all that said, here's what I really want to say in this video. First of all, let me be clear about where these questions come from, because I'm going to suggest you follow a process that the grad students follow. So for every chapter, a given graduate TA is assigned that chapter. They read the chapter, they watch the lectures associated with the chapter, and they write multiple choice questions, about 40 plus per chapter. They write them being guided by a manual, and that manual will be part of this post, I hope, so that you'll be able to see the exact same manual the graduate students are. And it's a manual that guides them about how to write fair multiple choice questions, but also how to write ones that test knowledge at different levels. And so first of all, look at that manual, get a clear sense of what graduate students are doing when they interact with the material and create questions. The best way to get a clear sense of the manual is to do what the graduate students do. And by that I mean, when you're studying, every now and then take a paragraph you just read and create questions. Just like follow the manual. just like the graduate students do. When you do that for a few questions, there's two benefits that can come from this. One of them is you get a real sense of how the text can be asked about, how what you're reading and what you're learning. You'll realize there's only so many ways to ask students about a certain bit of information. And you get experience by creating these questions. You get a real sense of what possible questions might be. And so as you do that, you will start to study a little differently. You will start to see questions in the information that you're studying, and that will make you better prepared for the final exam. Now, again, so let me tell you the second advantage. The second advantage is if you do this, and especially if you can find a partner in the course, then at some point you guys can swap the questions you generated, and you can test your knowledge using their questions and vice versa. So you get access to some practice questions which give you retrieval practice, which help you on the final exam. Okay, so that's cool. So in the ultimate world, you would do this with every paragraph you read or everything I said in the lecture, you would generate a question. That would take you forever. You would learn a lot. I guarantee you would learn the course deeply, but I also know that you guys have a lot of time pressures, you're taking a lot of courses, and so that's not reasonable. So here's what I really suggest. Learn to balance what I'm going to call passive versus active study. What I mean by active study is what I just described, creating questions based on that manual. Passive study would be just reading or just watching a lecture. Now, passive study can be effective, but it tends to be effective just for a while. So when you first start reading, you'll notice that you're reading and you're thinking about the information that's coming in and everything's going really well. You know, you feel like, yeah, I'm getting this. But you also may, if you're kind of present enough, you may notice that sometimes you read and your eyes are moving, but really nothing's coming in. Okay, so one thing I'll suggest is become mindful of that. Notice that sometimes passive approaches are working and sometimes they're not working. And that goes for watching lectures too. Sometimes you're watching and you're listening and everything's cool and you're getting it. Other times you're not really listening anymore. Your mind has gone somewhere else. In that latter case, there's no sense continuing. If your mind is not where, on what you're reading or on what you're hearing, then you have two choices at that point. Either stop and take a break, go away, relax, refresh your mind, and then come back when you're fresh, or switch to active studying. And this is what I'm really going to recommend. Use passive approaches because they're faster. Use passive approaches when they work, but when you feel they start to work, switch to this active approach of creating questions. And that will benefit. I'm going to suggest there will be an interaction there, that when you do that active approach, it will actually affect the way you passively interact too. You will start to hear questions when I'm talking. Oh, I can imagine how we could ask about that, or while you're reading. And so the active will actually impact your passive study in a good way. And of course, anything that you actually spend the time with the active learning on will probably be really well remembered. In fact, you may run into a situation that we often hear about from students, which is they'll go into an exam and they'll come out and they'll go, something really creepy happened, Professor Joordens. I went into your exam, I'd done what you said and created some questions, and one of my questions, well, pretty much, almost exactly like I wrote it, it was on the exam. And I go, yeah, creepy, but not really creepy, because there's only so many ways to ask you about this stuff. And if you start generating questions, you are actually going to generate questions that are very similar to the questions the TAs will generate. You're using the same process you're dealing with the same material. Some of your questions will be very similar. Those ones will be easy for you, obviously, on an exam. And so it's, a really cool kind of approach to use. Okay, so that's really it for my recommendation. Combine the passive with the active, and specifically for the active, do this question generation process. I do want to just kind of finish with this thought, just so you have the bigger overall picture, because I began by saying a TA is generating, say, 40 questions per chapter. And that includes both the textbook and the lecture, primarily the textbook, So most of the questions come from the textbook, about 80 to 85%. The rest come from the lecture, 15 to 20%. And so we have that for every chapter. What we then do is for any M-tuner, if it's on chapters 1 and 2, let's say, we randomly select questions from those the TA generated for 1 and 2. But we're also going to randomly select some of those for the final exam later. So that pool of questions that you will run into on the final exam is generated in the same way at the same time as the questions on an M-tuner. And again, this is why when you interact with them on an M-tuner in an exam-like way, you will gain skills and proficiencies of parsing and dealing with them that will help you on the final exam, because it's the same process used to generate the questions. So going through this should demystify all that. And the next time, if you try it, this is what I ask you to do. Try it for me for chapters 3 and 4. And then go into M-Tuner 2 and see how it feels. And go into M-Tuner 2 and, those of you who may have cheated or collaborated or whatever you want to call it, try not doing that. And my bet is your grade will not be that effective. And you'll notice that the thinking that you're doing as you go through the M-Tuner, well, that's the kind of thinking you'll be doing at the final exam. And that produces what we call good transfer of learning. So that's my recommendation. Do the M-Tuners right, and then study with the test in mind. And you do that by actually creating test questions while you study. All right, shutting up. So with this link to this video, there hopefully is also a link to that manual that we give to TAs. I hope you guys rock it. Alrighty, talk to you later.